Well, good morning and good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Three of our Sangha members are embarking on the path of preparing to receive the precepts, which we call Jukai ceremony. It takes about a year maybe to prepare, and I'll describe it, what it involves in a few moments. And it's open to anyone in the Sangha. There's no, you don't have to do a certain number of things first before saying that you would like to receive the precepts. Really, the only kind of requirement is that you're part of the Sangha and you're participating in some way and you've developed a connection with the teacher. And when that time feels right, you can ask the teacher, can I please prepare to receive the precepts? And some people do that quite early in their practice. I think I'd only been practicing 1 year when I asked my first teacher if I could receive the precepts. And some people, take many, many more years before they feel it's the right time. Because receiving the precepts is and traditionally for all your future lives, that the vow once taken can't be untaken. So it's a significant thing, but it's also not anything in particular either. It's really just formally acknowledging in front of your community that you want to follow the example of Shakyamuni Buddha and do good in the world. Feel connected with everybody in the world, people, plants and animals, and that you want to act from that truth. You want to function from that truth. So 3 of our Sangha members are embarking on that path, and what it involves is studying the precepts, and at the same time as studying them, you make a rakusu. You make one of these, which is like a miniature robe. Rather than becoming a priest and wearing a full robe, this is an alternative, a lay practitioner, a way to be deeply practicing the traditions in a lay life. So you make a rakusu, and it's hand stitched, and generally you meet about once a month with either a sewing teacher, or in this case I'm kind of the default sewing teacher, so with me, and sew together for about 3 hours once a month, and then do a bit of sewing in your own time if you want to. And it's a nice kind of grounded way to reflect upon the precepts in this very tangible way, sewing stitch by stitch, stitch by stitch. And the precepts that you receive are not like rules that you have to follow. They're not like some kind of external voice telling you what you have to do, and then you feeling like there's somebody watching. You have to behave well because someone's watching. That's not the flavor. It's not the flavor of the precepts. They're taking up the way of something, endeavoring to do your best, and not being hard on yourself when you don't do your best. Simply notice that you didn't deal with that terribly well. That's all we have to do, is just notice. So there's 16 precepts. The 3 refuges, which we're pretty much all familiar with because we chant them at various times. Taking refuge in Buddha, taking refuge in Dharma, taking refuge in Sangha. Taking refuge in Buddha is a little like saying taking refuge in our true nature, our true nature. Taking refuge in the Dharma is in the teachings that point us towards our true nature. And taking refuge in Sangha is in the community. Initially it was sort of like the community of monks and nuns, but over time, of course, it's come to mean much more than that, the whole community of life on this planet, taking care of it all and taking refuge in it all. I think of taking refuge as a little bit like turning ourselves towards it and not forgetting. Turning ourselves towards and not forgetting Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And then there's what's called the 3 pure precepts. They go, I vow to embrace and sustain right conduct. I vow to embrace and sustain all good. I vow to embrace and sustain all beings. So I vow to embrace and sustain right conduct can be the specifics of right conduct within a community, within a Zen community or a religious community. It can also be wanting to do your best to maintain the forms, the way that we bow, the way that we hold our hands in gasho, the way we offer incense, all of those things. But of course it really also means right conduct in the broadest sense, how we conduct ourselves moment by moment, and sometimes challenge by challenge. Something comes up and you need to respond. What's right conduct in that moment when somebody is combative with you? What's right conduct in that moment? And we have to work that out for ourselves. And then there's the 10 grave precepts. A disciple of Buddha does not kill. And we have to figure out what that means for each of us. It's not the same. What's not killing for one person is not the same for another person, because it's not speaking about literally killing so much as about our attitude towards life. Our attitude towards life. So a disciple of Buddha does not kill. A disciple of Buddha does not speak falsely. A disciple of Buddha does not take what is not given. A disciple of Buddha does not misuse sexuality. A disciple of Buddha does not give or take drugs. A disciple of Buddha does not speak of others' faults. A disciple of Buddha does not praise oneself at the expense of others. A disciple of Buddha does not indulge in anger. A disciple of Buddha doesn't spare the Dharma assets, which is a very interesting one. And a disciple of Buddha does not defame the 3 treasures. So I don't think I'll go into the details of those in this talk, but there's a lot to unpack with each of those. There's so many different subtle ways in which each of those teachings can be applied to our daily life. What I'd like to do is read from a book called The Mind of Clover by Robert Aitken. It's specifically about the precepts and the process of preparing for Jukai. And It's one of the books that I like us to read when I'm working with somebody to prepare for Jukai. This is one of the books that we would read together. So I'm going to read a little part from the chapter called The Mind of Clover. And I'll read a few pages of it. Chapter 17, The Mind of Clover. The hermit of Lotus Peak held forth his staff before his assembly and asked, "When the ancient ones reach this, why didn't they stay there?" The assembly was silent. Answering for his listeners, he said, "Because it has no power for guidance." So that's the koan, and here's Robert Aitken commenting. The original says, "Because it has no power for the path of others." This case, number 25 in the Blue Cliff record, is one of many in our koan study that illustrate the importance of emerging from beneath the Bodhi tree and responding to others. So, just to comment, the hermit held forth his staff and said, "When the ancient ones reach this, why didn't they stay there?" And that "this" is referring to their enlightenment, their awakening. When they reached a state of being completely at ease in the world, totally intimate with everything, why didn't they just stay there and relax and just enjoy the kind of bliss of feeling connected to everything? Why didn't they just stay there? And the teacher responded, "Because it has no power for guidance." Because basically that wouldn't make sense to do that. If one feels intimate with everything, then one's going to see that there is suffering in the world, and how could one be completely at ease and do nothing about the suffering of the world? It really isn't really possible. When we feel connected with everything, we can't help but feel a pull towards engaging kindly with the world without having to specifically search for troubles to fix. We don't have to go out searching. We just be in the world in whatever way our karmic circumstances cause us to be in the world. So I'll continue with reading. When the hermit held forth his staff, what was that? Just that. Like Fu Ta Xin striking the lectern to expound the Diamond Sutra, the hermit of Lotus Peak was showing the Dharma, the pure and clear law body that comes forth as all things. His question was, when the ancient ones attained realization of pure and clear Dharma, why didn't they just stay in that beautiful place of complete, all-penetrating peace until they passed on to parinirvana? When the Buddha was confirmed by the morning star, why did he then seek out his 5 disciples? When Mahakasyapa was confirmed by the Buddha's teaching, why did he feel compelled to become a teacher himself? And when Dogen Zenji found his body and mind fallen away, why did he bother to return to Japan? Realizing just this liberated these worthies, freeing them from their self-concern and revealing their unity with all beings. But one cannot stop there. The fulfillment of your experience of suffering, your compassion, is a matter of engaging with all beings in their travail. So the hermit continues his teisho, still holding out his staff, and he asks, "After all, what is this?" Nobody answers, and he says, "Holding my staff across the back of my neck, going to the 10,000 peaks." The myriad peaks are not mountains of isolation, but the peaks and valleys of our lives. The hermit sauntered among these peaks, quite at ease with himself, and we can be sure that he guided everyone he met as freely and generously as he guided his assembly in this case. Our task too is to respond generously to others. We can take as our models not just Shakyamuni, the hermit, and other great Dharma ancestors, but also such humble beings as bushes and grasses. With every fiber, beings of the plant world are guiding others, perpetuating their species, beginning new species as circumstances permit, conveying their vitality to soil, waters, air, insects, animals, and people. This is Mother Nature, we say in Western culture. This is the Sambhogakaya, we say in Buddhism, the body of Indra's net, the harmony of universal symbiosis. The Sambhogakaya is also our own way of realizing and actualizing that unity. So I want to pause for a moment there and say how lovely it is the way he says, with every fiber, beings of the plant world are guiding others. It just seems like such a beautiful way for us to look at the plant world, that without making any fanfare, without calling out and sort of saying, look at me, plants are just producing oxygen and creating soil and creating weather. And they're just doing it. How do we actualize the oneness of all beings? Through responsibility, the ability to respond like that of the clover. When the clover is cut, its roots die and release their nitrogen, and the soil is enriched. Earthworms flourish in the rich soil and deposit more nutrients. New seeds fall, take root, mature, and feed other organisms. Clover does not think about responsibility, and neither did Shakyamuni. He simply arose from his seat and went looking for his friends. The clover simply puts down its roots and puts up its leaves and flowers. And I'll just pause again there to talk a little bit about clover. I don't know if any of you do any gardening, but it's always good to have clover in your garden, because clover is not, its roots are kind of gentle, and the flower, the leaf of the clover is kind of gentle, and it fixes nitrogen into the soil. It really benefits soil, but when you don't need it, you can just pull it out really easily. So it's not like a weed that takes over your garden and is hard to manage. It gently benefits the soil, but when you don't need it, you can pull it out, and it doesn't complain or anything. It's just this wonderful plant, and it often just grows. Like, you don't even have to sow the seeds of clover. It often just happens. It's a really lovely plant, clover. People often are just happy to have it, and lots of people don't realize what a beneficial plant it is. They don't understand how beneficial clover is. So it's not by accident that Robert Aiken named this book The Mind of Clover. You know, can we be like the clover and be beneficial without even trying, and without making a big deal about it, and without people even noticing? There's something really beautiful about that, being of benefit to beings and not even having them notice particularly. There's something lovely about that. Something very humble and selfless about that. So continuing on. Fundamentally, the no thought of the clover and the no thought of Shakyamuni are the same. They come forth, and their response to circumstances is to give nourishment. No thought comes forth here as clover. There is Shakyamuni. Single, universal nature appears like this in the world. We identify clover here and Shakyamuni there, and acknowledge that the two are very different indeed. The clover produces pollen for the bees without a thought. Shakyamuni twirls a flower before his assembly without a thought. But Clover cannot call a meeting. Shakyamuni cannot poisonous thought, he is a poisonous person. With an enlightened thought, he is an enlightened person. With his great realization, he is unlikely to slip back into poisonous ways, but he could. Did you guys lose me for a moment? Yes, I don't know what happened. But I think this is the critical reason of why we have Jukai, because we are capable of doing harm. We're really capable of doing harm. And we're capable of doing harm even accidentally. We're capable of it. So Clover just really isn't capable of doing harm. But there's something about being human that makes us extremely capable of doing harm. And so it's very important as practitioners that we're aware of our capacity to do harm, and that we just notice and keep being observant of what is driving me in this moment. What is motivating me today? What's motivating me in this conversation? What's motivating me in this action? And not to be fearful of the fact that we're capable of doing harm, but just to be aware, just to keep checking in on ourselves. Is my speech wholesome at the moment? Are my thoughts wholesome? Am I thinking ill of somebody and then just going over and over and over that? Just to keep noticing ourselves. And even when we've been practicing for decades, we're unlikely to be doing much harm, but it doesn't mean we're not capable of it. Just like it said there, Shakyamuni is capable of doing harm. Unlikely, but still capable of it. So important even for Shakyamuni to just keep checking. So the precepts are this fantastic way for us to keep checking. After I did Jukai, and I think a few people here have done Jukai. I think both Scott Tyler, you've done Jukai. I think, no, you haven't. Oh, well, there you go. I know Scott Lowe has. Once you do Jukai, I did, and many people report this, you become much more aware of your actions. You just become aware, am I taking something that isn't given? Am I just kind of thinking? I remember, sort of when I would, not that I would go to something like a buffet these days, but years ago, maybe would go to a buffet or go to somewhere like, a free breakfast or something if you're at a conference or in a motel in the mornings. And would I sort of like get that feeling like take as much as I can because I can, noticing that energy in myself and instead going, hold on, I'm not especially hungry. I don't need to take extra just because it's free. I don't have to just because it's free, and because I can, little things like that, just becoming much more aware of my actions and what's driving my actions. It had an enormous impact on my life doing Jukai. And every time you put the Rakusu on, you just you remember that you made this, that you sewed all those stitches, and you did it with this kind of vow. You did it with this vow in mind, to want to live well and to be skillful. Yeah. So it's a great ceremony. And what happens is, so you spend about a year sewing and doing study. It's not that it's terribly arduous. It's not really. It's not arduous at all. It's just a time to really reflect in a very sober way about your own life. And then we have a ceremony, and people of the Sangha, and you can invite family members to come too as well. And it's only a fairly short ceremony. Maybe it takes an hour. And the students and the teacher just go through the precepts together, and you go through them one by one, and each student, the teacher asks, will you uphold this precept? And the student says, yes, I will. And they go through each one. Will you uphold this precept? Yes, I will. And you do it in front of your community. Yeah, so 3 of our Sangha are now in the beginning point. We've had our first meeting. They're getting their blue fabric. The first rakusu you make is in blue. And we'll start sewing. We've made our first date for sewing. So this is something that you can consider doing yourself if you haven't done it already, at some point whenever you feel ready. Yeah. I think I'll stop there, and it'd be nice to hear any thoughts that any of you have about this. I'll just turn off the recording.